Dan Pardi. How are you today, my friend?
I'm doing great, Sachin. Thank you for having me here. Really looking forward to our chat today. So thanks for making some time.
Yeah, I'm really excited. Looking at your bio, you have a very diverse background,
Yeah.
and it seems like you lived many lifetimes in this lifetime. What is lighting you up the most right now about health and wellness?
Wow, that's a big question and a great one. And, the answer to that question will be different in a couple of weeks, and it was a few weeks ago. And what that indicates is generally like there's so many things to learn and understand and to focus on. And so I do have areas that pop up and are really interesting for me. And I then dig in to those. I try to understand the details, and then I always try to link that back to larger principles and bigger understanding because it's really difficult to infer a complete or improved understanding in health just through detail memorization. It's good to know some details, but the harder work oftentimes, but the most enriching, rewarding is then trying to think about the wisdom you can get from the data at hand. How does that feed into the bigger pictures? And I think I've realized that, I've done a lot of things in my career, but what probably interests me most is sort of like being a health philosopher, like
Mm,
thinking about the bigger picture. Why are we doing this? And that can be from like an overall health practice or very specifically about a specific task or activity. And that's a really fun way to interact with health, but it'll certainly be a lifetime of really hard and interesting questions and challenges. But yeah, at the moment, I would say stem cells, just because this is a newer product for me and it's giving me a great for our company, and it's giving me a great opportunity to dive deeper into this subject than ever before, which is really enriching. So I'm grateful for that opportunity too.
yeah, stem cells is very relevant to me right now as well.
Mm,
It's something that I've experienced for myself. I went down to Costa Rica earlier
oh,
this year and I did
okay.
umbilical stem cells
You did.
and
Wow.
had those injected to me. So that was a pretty unique experience right after an ayahuasca journey. So I did ayahuasca for 4 days in a row,
Yeah.
and then on the fifth day I did stem cells. So I was like literally being reborn. Spiritually, emotionally, physically, right, all the way down to my regenerative capacities. And I also
Mm,
have been taking stem cell supplementation, and I've tried the Qualia stem cells as well. So, right
yeah.
up my alley in terms of, what's alive for me right now as well is we all want to be young. We all want to be healthy for as long as we possibly can.
Yeah.
And stem cells are proving over and over again to be a viable path for that. Speaking of philosophy, my philosophy, and
Mm,
perhaps aligns with yours as well, is that the doctor of the future is the patient.
hmm.
And with all of these things that are coming to the forefront, whether it's PRP or stem
Hmm.
cells, or even peptides, right? We're using compounds to enhance our own body's function, and the body is doing all the work. We're just providing the with the environment and the instructions that it needs in order to do that. So, very much
Hmm.
in alignment with my philosophy on health and just the belief that nothing can fix us better than we can fix ourselves if we provide it with our body with the right environment and conditions for that to happen.
No, Sachin, we could spend the entire hour just talking about that idea right there. That's such a rich one. The we do play a huge role, obviously, in our own health, and encouraging people to embrace that idea is important because I think the trends or the movement, the energy in modern healthcare has been that we just outsource this. Don't think about it,
Mm,
let the experts treat you. And obviously they have a really important role, but it's far from complete. And there will be no more important person than you in navigating your own health journey. And so while it can feel daunting at times because you might not be a scientist, you're a lawyer, you're a school teacher, whatever you do, it can feel like, gosh, there's so much that I need to learn in order for me to be a good steward of my own journey in health. But we also have a lifetime to try new things, to figure things out, And I encourage people to also pay really close attention, become great listeners to what's happening inside of you and figure out what works for you. You are a very unique individual. There is no other version of you elsewhere in the entire universe. And you have that opportunity now to sort of take in the intellectual learned knowledge side, which is always increasing, your experiential side, and put that together, you know, constantly throughout life to try to have greater impact on the path that you walk and have that be beneficial back to your health. So highly encourage people to think of it that way. And so for all listeners out there now, kudos to you for paying attention, for following the story, and for being curious.
Stem cells have come a long way in terms of, how we can access them and things that we can do to increase our own stem cell production. But for the person who's new to this conversation, maybe we can go, approach this from a beginner's mind perspective. So let's start off by what exactly are stem cells, and why are they vital for healing, repair, aging, like all the things that we want when it comes to vitality.
Yeah, I'm glad that we are starting from the beginning because it's really if you're telling a story, you don't want to skip over the foundational parts of that story. Otherwise, the rest of it will have be disadvantaged in terms of it making sense. And so yeah, so stem cells are special cells in the body that can make copies of themselves and turn into other types of cells. So I'm going to pause and say that again. They can duplicate and make a copy of themselves, and then another cell that then integrates itself into your tissue, a heart cell, a brain cell, an immune cell circulating in your blood. And this is how our body will regenerate itself from when we're born to when we die. So it's a major, major part of our repair system. And what they do is they replace worn out and damaged cells that, our cells will exhaust themselves and die. But we need to replace that tissue. And so they can supply any type of cell that is needed depending on the context. So that is what they are. And I've always been really interested in like, where do things come from? What is the origin? And to do that, we can look to see how stem cells even evolved. And so for the first, this is a story that I particularly love. Like there are, we sometimes talk about human evolution as being 200,000 years old. Some will go back to 2 million. Human evolution really starts with the beginning of life on Earth because we descended from the beginning of life. Now, the first 3 billion years, there were no stem cells. This is just cells that were dividing and living independently and doing very important things. They were working on creating maximal internal efficiency that then enabled multicellularity. Multicellularity is where cells came together and at first worked as a fleet of independent cells, but they would share information back and forth to each other through communication cues so they could read the metabolic state of the cell next to them. And over the next couple 100 million years, this multicellularity began about 600 to 800 million years ago. Then we started to see cellular specialization where not only did cells group together, but they started to take on different roles. So instead of all of us, if we're cells doing the same thing, it's a divide and conquer strategy. You do certain tasks, I'll do others. And that's the beginning of tissues, right? And that in that process, you now have something called differentiation. Cells have to differentiate and take on unique functions. And so once, organisms had specialized cells, they needed renewable pools of undifferentiated cells. Undifferentiated means they haven't become anything yet to replace the specialized cells that had died off. And that's where stem cells emerged into existence. And so this concept is ancient and it's basically an evolutionary tool for managing complexity of living organisms.
Hmm. The visual I'm getting is like a stem cell sending its little stem cell baby off into the world, patting it
Yeah,
on the head and saying, "You can be anything you want to be." Right?
I
So
love
a
that.
little cartoon meme, right? It sounds like science fiction,
Yeah.
right? But it's obviously not.
Yeah.
This is, a big chunk of the work that you do at Qualia, and there's other organizations that are really diving deep into the research, and this is
Yeah.
a very key area of interest as we want to slow down the aging process, or age gracefully, whatever it is. I know some people are
Yeah.
trying to age backwards. Some people are trying to never die. Some people want to live to 180. So wherever you fit into that spectrum, if you're
Hmm.
listening to this, as you're listening to this, stem cells can be very beneficial for you because they can significantly improve your quality of life. Um, and of course, help you age gracefully. So there are 12 hallmarks of aging. We don't have to get into all of them, but how do
Yeah.
stem cells tie into the hallmarks of aging?
Yeah. In fact, before I even get there, maybe I can introduce some additional characteristics because we'll talk about different types of stem cells. There isn't just one type.
Mm,
And this will be foundational to us then thinking about the hallmarks of aging. And I can talk about those as
sure.
well, because that's fascinating. But you will hear stem cells defined based off of their potency. Now, potency is a word that describes what they can become. And I love your visual. I just picture two parents with a little kid in a lunchbox and saying, okay, go differentiate, right? Figure who you are in this world. And so now to play on that analogy, when you're very, very young, you can become anything. If you're a zygote, you have what's called totipotency.
Mm,
And that means that you can become any cell in the human body. What is more common, the term that we heard is pluripotency. For all intents and purposes, a totipotent cell and a pluripotent cell both can become anything. Yes, there are some unique differences. Pluripotent cells cannot become extra embryonic tissue like the placenta. We don't need to go down that rabbit hole. It probably confounds the understanding of the situation. But there are five main categories of potency. So totipotent, pluripotent, they can become anything. Now imagine your child has made it into high school and they've started to take classes based off of their interest. Okay. And they're really interested in science. We're going to use that because I love science.
mhm,
And so they start to take classes, and instead of taking, let's say history and law, or they're really they're using all their elective time and they are starting to specialize. That is equivalent to other types of potencies, multipotent, oligopotent, unipotent. Those types of cells have now started down a path of differentiating, and they can't become anything, but they're more likely to do a very good job at certain tasks that we need, right? So they can become multiple types, but only within related lineages. So
mm,
an example is hematopoietic, excuse me, stem cell. That something, or an HSC. Those are very common in clinical medicine, and especially with relation to stem cells. And they can differentiate into different types of blood and immune cells, and the lineages are myeloid and lymphoid. And so, if you are unfamiliar with those terms, the myeloid lineage simply means that it can produce red blood cells, platelets, monocytes, and types of granulocyte-based cells like neutrophils, basophils, and eosinophils. So it's making blood cells. The myeloid lineage is a line that is based off of hematopoietic stem cells that is making blood cells. The other line is lymphoid lineage, and that's making immune cells, B cells, T cells, natural killer cells in the immune system. So another example of a multipotent stem cells are mesenchymal stem cells. These are the two that you hear most: hematopoietic stem cells and mesenchymal stem cells. They can become various forms of connective tissue, like bone, like cartilage, like fat, and even muscle. And then you have oligopotent cells. They can only become a few related cell types. So an example would be like an osteoprogenitor cell. They're restricted to just making bone, so osteoblasts and osteocytes. And then lastly, you have unipotent stem cells, and they can become only one type of stem cell. So, but they can still self-renew. And that, remember, that stem cells do two major things. They self-renew, They make a copy and they make a cell destined to become the child going off and becoming, into their career. All right.
Hmm.
And so a good example of that would be a muscle satellite cell. So as you can see, you have different types of stem cells in the body, and all of which can self-renew and differentiate. But some types can differentiate into more cells, and some types in fact can differentiate into anything, and others can only differentiate into one thing. All right. So hopefully that will give you a better sense of what stem cells are really doing. And, I hope this isn't too much, but I love looking into the idea of like, all right, differentiation, right? So we know we can copy itself, but what does actual like that differentiation look like? And that helps me. Like sometimes it could feel like too much information. I think it really helps me understand. Like when I'm looking into a new area, it helps ground me in like, okay, I can see the full circle process here. So the differentiation is then triggered by like you now have the stem cell. It's undifferentiated. It can become different things. And it is triggered by these external cues like growth factors and cytokines and even signals actually from the extracellular matrix and even physical forces. So movement of your muscles can trigger signals that then will tell a stem cell how to differentiate. Okay. So how? Well, all of these signals, cytokines from to movement, are going to then activate signaling pathways. And these signaling pathways have very funny names like Wnt, Notch, Sonic Hedgehog. And by the way, these are ancient. These go back to 600 to 800 million years ago. They have been with us since the beginning. These are ancient pathways. So these extracellular signal pathways then trigger a biochemical cascade that is happening inside of the cell, right? External forces are now shaping what's happening inside the cell. And what they do is that they can influence transcription factors. And now a transcription factor is a protein that binds to specific DNA sequences and can turn a gene on or off. And thereby they can control which proteins a cell makes. So remember, all of our cells have all of our genetic information, but we don't want our muscle cells to be making neural tissue or fat tissue. We want our muscle cells to make muscle tissue. And that is this process. That is how this process works. External factors drive signaling cascades, affect transcription factors that affect genes. And those genes say, make this kind of cell specifically. That's how that works. And once it's differentiated, so once a cell now has all those signals and it's only making, let's say, muscle protein, then epigenetics will come in and they'll stabilize the cell's fate. Okay. Unused genes are silenced, and that further will lock in its identity. And so all of this then is reinforced with these biochemical loops that then help to suppress the alternative. And that's really propitious for us humans that have hundreds, even maybe thousands of different cell types. We want all of those cell types to be performing specific goals and functions. And this process that I just described enables this differentiation that I described to occur. And that's how a stem cell that is a mold of clay, a little child, becomes something that is highly functional within the context of our 38 trillion cells.
Hmm. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Does this process ever go haywire or wrong? And if it does, like what are some of the consequences of that?
Yes, it can. So, some of the consequences of if you think about it, you have these cells that are reproducing. And in fact, there is some interesting evidence that your stem cells can even outlive their host. We are the host, that they have, in a sense, an immortality to them. Now, don't get me wrong, they can aggregate um, issues that would cause problems in how they differentiate. And so, for example, some problems that could go wrong would be de-differentiation, that all of the processes that I just described that help a cell not only become something specific but lock into that state go haywire, and now you have de-differentiated into something that is non-specific, less specific. And that can be manipulated. So technology is trying to use dedifferentiation in order to then create a pool of cells that could become new tissues. Because as we get older, we do experience what's called stem cell exhaustion. And so our body is less good at making new tissue. That's something that we can talk about with the hallmarks of aging. Another problem is cancer. If your body is not regulating this process well, then you will have a condition where there is excessive proliferation. So yeah, there are issues that can occur, and that's why we want to have a highly functional stem cell system throughout the body.
What are some things that can disrupt that system or cause it to not function optimally? And I mean, I'm sure there's a variety of them: environmental, nutrition, mental, emotional, trauma. I'm just curious, like how much these other factors play a role and what can we do, right? Because
Yeah.
I'm sitting here thinking, okay, like what am I doing to take care of my stem cells? We kind
Yeah.
of look at ourselves in the mirror and we take care of, our organs and, our, musculoskeletal system, etc. But
Yeah.
what can we do to take better care of our stem cells?
I mean, a good model to understand this is aging itself, because we do experience stem cell exhaustion. And so that is a decline in their ability to self-renew and generate functional cells. So it's a great model to understand your question exactly. Like, how can things go wrong? And possibly what could we do about it? So, first of all, you're right. There's some theory that a major driver of aging is related to stem cells, because your body is simply not repairing itself once the decline begins. And that's why stem cell exhaustion is one of 12 hallmarks of aging. And just to give you an overview of hallmarks of aging, it's a model that was put forth by a group of 5 researchers in 2013. They published a report in the journal Cell, and it really transformed the industry. It's now one of the most cited publications in all of Cell from the last 10 years. And it basically categorized at first 9 different hallmarks of aging, of which stem cell exhaustion is one of them. And then a decade later, that same group published 3 more hallmarks and some categorization of those different hallmarks. And there's a lot to discuss there. It might be overwhelming to go through it all, but no model is perfect, but some are useful. So some of
Mm.
us look at hallmarks of aging as sort of a unassailable truth about what's going on. The way that I look at them is that these are probably not drivers of aging, but they are more proximal observations that reliably occur during the aging process. So what do I mean by that? Is there anything upstream of these hallmarks of aging that is then driving this reliably observed tissue damage? And yeah, I mean, evolutionary biologists would claim that, gosh, there's not 9 hallmarks of aging. There's not 12. There's hundreds. There's so many different ways that we can observe reliably something that does occur with
Mm.
aging. And still, with that caveat in place, I think that this Hallmark paper has been very useful, and I am glad to see the work continue in that space. But don't be surprised when other hallmarks are introduced and offered. And even just stimulating debate can be a wonderful thing for science, right? It gets people thinking. And then hopefully it can also turn into interventions. So going back to that's hallmarks of aging, and let's go back to stem cell exhaustion, which is one of the 9 original and now 12. And there's even others that are on the horizon that have been offered. But yes, so when it occurs, stem cells lose their ability to divide and regenerate. And whether it's from overuse, so demanding too much of your stem cells,
Mm.
aging or damage like radiation, and think of it like a rechargeable battery, right? It's been recharged too many times. Like we know that with rechargeable batteries, after you've recharged them for a couple of years, they don't hold the same charge that they
Mm.
did when you first bought them.
Right.
That is a
Your phone, for example, the battery runs out faster.
I'm very much looking. I have not watched the Apple event today talking about the iPhone 17, but I need it. I need the new one because my phone runs out of batteries before the day's over. So it's particularly apropos on a day like today.
Right.
That's an imperfect analogy, but it's still helpful. So once they're drained, they lose their power to kind of, to help facilitate tissue repair. And
Mm.
so some of the main drivers of this are chronic inflammation. It disrupts the cellular niche. Now, a niche is the place in which a stem cell lives, particularly in the beginning of its life. Okay. Now, we know inflammation is a dirty word. But the truth is, inflammation plays a critical role in our health. We don't want the absence of inflammatory markers. What we really care about is inflammatory balance. And due to a variety of reasons, the aggregation of damage, for instance, with more time on Earth, and not only the aggregation of damage, but aggregation in damage in of the repair systems meant to clean up the damage.
Mm.
So imagine this visual. You have, a room with some leaks in it from the ceiling, and then you have mops. And the mops are helping to clean up the leaks. With age, you have more leaks coming out of the ceiling, but you also have mops that are broken. So they're less good, right? You're getting it from both sides. And that's a good way to think about this. So this chronic inflammation provides really important signals, and for both to support renewal and also then differentiation, as we were discussing earlier. So, for example, in aged muscles, when a satellite stem cell, which becomes a muscle cell, when it's exposed to inflammatory markers like IL-6 or TNF alpha, um, that typically those are needed to differentiate into, they cause differentiation into myoblasts too early. And now myoblasts are muscle precursor cells. So it's basically part of the differentiation process into fully active muscular tissue. And so what ends up happening is that those satellite cells can differentiate, but they can't self-renew. And so you see there's a part of this process that where chronic inflammation is disrupting the normal self-renewal and differentiation process. Yes, we do okay for a little bit with some continual differentiation, but we're not also causing renewal, right? That's a really critical part to healthy stem cells is their ability to renew. So instead of renewing, they fuse into fibers and this reduces the stem cell pool and it impairs future generation. So
Mm.
that's one thing is inflammation. And another thing is oxidative stress. And what oxidative stress does, it is an inevitable part of our metabolism. When we understand how energy is made from the food that we eat and the air that we breathe, that oxidative stress is a part of that entire process. And in fact, aging modalities that look to try to extinguish all oxidative stress ended up causing more harm than good because we also need those signals to then drive everything in our body is on these feedback loops. And so if you take one part of that feedback loop away, the cell can collapse in some unfortunate fashion. And that's the same thing with oxidative stress. But at the same time, oxidative stress is a major driver of DNA damage. And then that will trigger arrest, apoptosis, and then the reduction in stem cell pools. So, with each division also we see telomeres shorten. That limits the replication capacity and pushes cells into senescence. You can see now epigenetic drift, mitochondrial dysfunction. There's all sorts of things that are occurring, and each of those has a contribution into limiting the overall efficacy of our stem cells. And by the way, this is all bidirectional. So, there is no singular cause of aging. It's as though the entire the soup that we are, ends up having increasing amount of problems. And so the real goal and interest is how can we push that? How do we push that off so that these problems that are occurring are happening later in the lifespan? And the good news is that you can do remarkably well, especially if you are making comparisons to average in modern living societies. You can be somebody who is in their 70s and 80s and doing shockingly well when you employ some of these strategies, a lot of which come down to lifestyle. But, some of these radical, I won't say radical, but exciting new health span interventions, like things that around stem cells, are now coming into the fore as possibilities for maybe even doing better than somebody who is paying great deal of attention just to their lifestyle.
You know, inflammation is a huge part of what we work on addressing with our clients. So knowing that,
Great.
quenching their inflammation, not completely suppressing it, obviously, but
Yeah.
excess inflammation is what we're trying to get at here. And excess oxidative stress is
Yeah.
exactly what we help our clients with. And it's great to know that that's going to help them
Yeah.
create healthier stem cells for a longer period of time. For somebody who's maybe wondering or scratching their head wondering, how do I know if my stem cells are becoming exhausted? What are some of the early signs or even later signs that they might be experiencing that?
Yeah, this will typically, we start to see stem cell decline in a very non-obvious way, even in our 30s. But you can feel it more in your 40s. So you might start to see some graying of hair. You might start to see some wrinkling of skin. Now, the only reason that these things are occurring is because, like, the noticeable signs of aging is because we are not regenerating tissue, even though there's damage that's happening always just by living. But it's now outpacing our ability to create a net neutral situation where what we regenerate completely replaces what as the forces that drive loss. And so people will notice aches in their joints. They wake up in the morning and they're stiff, versus feeling really lubricated and limber. Uh, the mental side is harder to assess. Some people will notice loss of memory, but our cognitive capabilities change across the lifespan. So you have reduced thinking speed. You might not hold as much information in your mind, your working memory, as you did previously, but you also have the advancement of crystallized knowledge. So you've had more time on Earth to gain wisdom. And I like to depict aging not as this, you know, just simply an inexorable cellular decline, but biology favors different attributes uh, as we age. Right? When you're young, there's a tremendous investment into displaying rich health because that helps to attract mates. And what evolution cares about more than anything is survival and reproduction. And you could put those in an order where it's reproduction is at the very top and survival is second because it's you're surviving so that you can reproduce. Now that doesn't have to be your personal goals. Not at
Mm.
all. That is the goals of evolution. And another goal of evolution was not to create an organism that indefinitely survives forever. Rather, it creates an organism in humans that can live for a certain time on Earth long enough to then reproduce. And we do live longer than our direct reproductive age because there's the grandparent hypothesis, for example, right? That because we invest a lot in fewer offspring, that there is a evolutionary advantage to helping your offspring's offspring survive. All right, we have a very slow development process. The brain continues to myelinate deep into its 20s. We are still developing our capabilities into the well into the third decade of life, where the
Mm.
opposite strategy would be to have thousands of kids and hope that some of them survive, and you might not have any parental investment at all. So evolutionist chooses a variety of different ways in which an organism can reproduce and then survive. But what it cares about is that you are creating more offspring and it's continuing the germline, not your the goal is not for your individual body to survive forever, but for your germline, which is, the cells in the body that are for reproduction, that those actually continue. That's what life is, that's what our human life has been orchestrated around from an evolutionary perspective. So yeah, we will experience decline in our life in some ways with our tissues, but a way to perceive that is that when you're young, your body cares a lot about reproduction. But when you're older, you have all this aggregated wisdom that you can share with younger generations.
Mm.
And so my goal of staying younger longer, if you want to put it that way, right? In quotes, staying younger, it's really just to maintain a capabilities that then help me support future generations grow into, healthy, productive, happy individuals. And as you go from decade to decade, you can see yourself being more in that group of, you're sharing wisdom. The elders of a tribe were more about keeping peace amongst a tribe of of people that have different opinions, because the tribe is almost like an organism itself, right? So
Mm.
you can see how they're needed. And if you're good at that, if you can aggregate and share wisdom with younger generations, you can really help the world. So your purpose as an older person, you still have strong purpose, and you have to work as hard to keep yourself functioning as a person who's working hard to make themselves, you know, reproductively fit. And by the way, you might be a person who's like, I don't ever want to have kids. That's okay. That's not the point of us living. But again, you have to sort of separate the point, evolution's points and drivers within particular decades, and your point of living, which you get to establish. You get to choose, like, what do I want out of this life?
Mm. There's a philosopher in you. I love it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Um, so, just like most things, there's a lot of myths surrounding stem cells.
Yeah.
Sometimes people know enough to be dangerous, or they don't know
Yes.
enough to take action. And for many things, like especially in the longevity space, people think you have to be like uber wealthy. And maybe a couple decades ago that was true.
Yeah.
Sequencing your genome was, $1 million, and now you can do it for a couple $100. And even the stem cells that I had, that wasn't cheap. But there are ways that we can increase our proliferation of stem cells and production of stem cells through supplementation,
Yeah.
which can be done at a fraction of the cost, and you can do it from the comfort of your home. So, tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So I like to think of what's happening in the clinic, even though it's stem cells, it's different. But you're right. So the first two groups that tend to get access to new things is wealthy people and athletes, right? Professional athletes.
Hmm.
And hopefully over time, there is a democratization, if you will, of that through access and lower cost. So more, if there's real benefit there, that more people can access good ideas and benefit their lives. So being at the very forefront of new technology comes with risks, but there's also some benefits. And uh, for a long time, we've been now using stem cells in the clinic, and yeah, they're costly, right? You take them out of the body, you concentrate them, you put them back into the body. You can do it out of the iliac crest, where you're taking hematopoietic stem cells out of bone marrow, which, excuse me, which is uncomfortable. And then you can also take stem cells out of fat tissue. Those are the mesenchymal stem cells, and those are being explored for more purposes now. In fact, there's some thinking that mesenchymal stem cells really are mostly just acting as inflammatory signaling molecules that create a better state for your existing stem cells to not become exhausted. Uh, but yes, and then there's even Muse cells. So these are new cells that these are new in terms of our understanding of them. They stand for multi-lineage differentiated stress resistant cells. There's a lot of excitement about them and how they could potentially be used, possibly even extracting them, um, from a donor. It can be autologous, or it can so you can get them from somebody else. You can get them from yourself, and then you put them back into the body, and then they go find where the damage is, and they help to do renewal. And so there's a lot happening in that space, and it's exciting. Then you have stem cell supplements. So these are oral supplements that you would take, and there is actually some solid evidence that that these botanicals are having an influence, a positive influence on the stem cells that you have. So mostly from preclinical studies, that's where it usually starts. But that you see improved mobilization of stem cells and differentiation, and I might come back there actually just to talk about this, because we did talk a little bit about the process of differentiation, but we also probably should discuss like how do stem cells even move around the body. So would you like for us to go in that direction? Because then when you're talking about nutraceuticals and supplements, we're really talking about all of those processes. So maybe we should go in that direction for a minute.
Yeah, yeah. Let's go there and unpack that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Um, Sorry, let me get a little more water. My mouth is dry, if you don't mind.
Sure, of course.
Uh, okay, so sorry. When All right, so when we think about what is a stem cell doing? We talked about how there's different types in the body, right? We talked about their potency, and now we can talk about their life cycle, if you will. So they usually start in a protective environment called the niche, which we mentioned earlier, right? And that's bone marrow for blood cells. And then so signals from neighboring cells and things like adhesion molecules and soluble factors, they all keep the stem cell quiet until it's needed. Okay. That's important for how we might want to intervene as a product company that is trying to affect this in a positive way. Okay. So stem cells are in their niche and they are quiet until needed. Then, when the body needs to repair new cells, growth factors, there's one called GCSF and GM-CSF, they will activate stem cells. And by the way, those stand for granulocyte colony stimulating factor and granulocyte macrophage colony stimulating factor. What colony are they referring to stimulate? Stem cell population. So then enzymes and signaling proteins, they loosen their grip of the stem cell in the niche. Okay. That's the very first. The signal has now been given. And instead of keeping them tight in their niche, they now enter into the circulation and they're guided by these chemical gradients. And so stem cells, they don't wander aimlessly. They actually think of them, um, think of like you walk outside your door and you smell pizza and you are hungry and you want to eat the pizza. So you have to follow the scent of where the pizza is coming from to make it into the pizza shop. Think of stem cells in that way, all right? That they follow the scent trail that's made by chemokines, especially one that is important because we try to affect this axis called the CXCR4 SDF1. So SDF1 is like the beacon, right? That's the signal where the smell is wafting from. And then CXCR4 is the receptor on the stem cell. All right, so it's following that scent trail. Now, as it's getting closer to the pizza shop, then there are these adhesion molecules like L-selectin and integrins that help them slow down. They help them be like, okay, we're getting close to where we need to go. And then they stick to the vessel wall nearby. And then they move right into the tissue. And then once inside the target tissue, the stem cells receive local cues, the growth factors, the VEGF in the blood, nerve growth factors that give it direction. We talked about that a little bit earlier, right? How then it knows, all right, now I've moved from my bone marrow to a place where I'm now making blood cells or immune cells, and I'm now knowing what to become. And I won't go over that again because we talked about that a bit earlier. But now you can see that these stem cells are in a particular place. They have to leave that place and make it to the place where they're needed. So hopefully that was beneficial to your audience because now you have a little clearer idea about how these are working, especially in ways that we're trying to influence this. So the question that I have for you, Sachin, is would you, if you were designing products in this way, would you want, and you know that they are typically quiet until they're needed, would you want to have a product that is constantly telling them to leave their niche?
It's a good question. I would assume no in that
Yeah,
case.
that's right. Yeah, you can, one of the factors that is driving stem cell exhaustion is overusage,
Hmm.
right? So if you're constantly trying to pump out your stem cells, even though the body's always repairing itself, that might not be a favorable way to intervene, right? Instead, to do it in more of a punctuated fashion where you stimulate the release and then you stimulate all of those different processes along the way that help the stem cells find where they need to be, where they need to go. And then you also then support the new niche that enables that stem cell to actually differentiate and become functional tissue. Those would be the goals of a program, and you wouldn't have to do it all the time again. So those ideas I mentioned because they were very much in mind when we thought about how we would create our product.
That answers a big question I had in my head
Mm,
because there are products, and we won't name names, but there are products that you take on a daily basis,
yeah,
and it's not cheap. It's it can be quite expensive.
yeah,
And then when I received the product that your company Qualia was so kind enough to send to me, I almost felt like, is this enough?
yeah,
Right? Like, how could this be doing anything if I'm only taking it for a few days
yeah,
versus taking it every day, multiple times a day as a supplement?
yeah,
And now what you've just explained helps make a lot more sense of that. So thank you for asking that question
yeah,
and having the thoughtfulness to take that into consideration, because sometimes we think more is more
yeah.
when less can actually be more. And isn't that like the paradox of life in so many ways?
It's so true. And for somebody who wants to do the most to take care of themselves, which I always really appreciate, avoiding the tendency of more is more is just good to keep as a heuristic in the back of your mind. And you're right. There are formulations out there that really focus on a single dimension, like mobilization. Let's constantly stimulate the mobilization of stem cells. The body's always needing to be repaired. I don't know if that is truly the right way to think about it. Um, in fact, one of the reasons why the company Qualia was so appealing to me is because we always try to respect the full system
Mm.
of anything that we are trying to affect and influence, which is why we make formulations instead of single ingredients. So, from a scientific perspective, the first place is to say, okay, is this a therapeutic area of interest? And do we think that we could is it possible that we could intervene in a way that helps people have better health outcomes, even if it's a very, a specific domain? So that's where we start from. That takes scientific knowledge, wisdom, working in the space for a long time. And then secondarily is what are all the key players? How does that system work? How does it naturally work? Right. So you could imagine, seeing some papers that show this compound improved mobilization this much, and that could be really exciting to build a product off of that. But is that the full picture? And so if you go back to the origins of Qualia, the company used to be called Neurohacker Collective. And the founders then said, they started by making a nootropic compound, Qualia Mind. It was called something different at the time, but that was the fabric of this company from the very beginning is how do we support all of the systems involved in the different cognitive domains that we care to affect. So instead of just, again, taking one thing, how do we support neurotransmitter synthesis? How do we reduce oxidative stress or keep it in a zone that we're happy with? Can we provide, nutraceuticals and botanicals that have an influence on enzymes that break down the neurotransmitters that are present in the synapse, right? That was the type of thinking that was the beginning seed of what this company is, and it's spread to every single other product that we've made, including this one. So we looked at hundreds of different ingredients for generating this product, and we settled on 15. And there's always the art of formulation, right? How do you choose this one over this one? And it comes down to, smart people with knowledge in that area that make, sometimes hard choices that say, this is what we think is a really good way to create the effect that we're looking for. Right.
Yeah. I mean, in studying so many different ingredients, it's probably difficult to kind of narrow it down, right? To the, I
Yeah.
believe there's 15 ingredients that are in the product.
Yeah.
And I know this product is designed to address 6 aspects of stem cell activity. Maybe you could walk us through what that means in kind of day-to-day terms.
Yeah. Yeah. So, we were talking about this a little bit before, which is you have, the supporting mobilization. There's a process called homing, and homing is then where a stem cell finds where it needs to go. Then there's the process of differentiation, which is affecting how do you affect the inflammatory environment? In fact, I'll give you a good anecdote into this because it's valuable. But gosh, probably, I don't know, 2017, I don't know the exact year. My podcast, Human OS, which I'm not running at the time, but my goal when I started that podcast was to say, I want to go directly to the researchers who are doing the work, and I want to talk to them about why they did their study. And that was kind of lacking at that time. And so, um, I've been interested in aging for multiple decades now, ever since I read Lenny Guarenti's book, The Ageless Quest. He's from
Hmm.
MIT. One Scientist's Search for Genes That Prolong Youth. That was published in 2003. And he's now gone on to become one of the founding members of the company Elysium. And, so he was an important person that was trying to translate. Uh, he was kicking off this geroscience development because for a long time, aging was not considered a credible area to look at. It was, if you were doing that, you were thought to be, a bit of a charlatan. Like this is not something we can affect. Let's get more serious and focus on stuff that people are experiencing now. And that the pioneers in that space had to be very brave, right? They knew the data better and they knew that there was a there. And anyhow, so he kicked that off. But then, we're still kind of in that window, although there is a different perspective. And one of the researchers that I talked to was Irina Conboy at UC Berkeley. And she did these parabiosis studies where they're gruesome. They actually they sew an old mouse and a young mouse together. And
Oh
so
man,
I know it's terrible.
poor mice.
I know. There's an exchange between the two. And what they saw is that the old mouse got younger and the young mouse got older. And that kicked off a line of research that says, okay, what's going on here? Are there these signaling molecules that the young mouse is receiving that is making it's accelerating its aging, right? And vice versa. And so stem cells are critical to the story. But what she noticed is that, we don't lose a tremendous amount of stem cells. When you're older, you might have only 90% of what you had when you were younger. What really caused stem cell exhaustion is that the niche becomes problematic. The niche itself becomes one where the stem cells simply can't regenerate.
Hmm.
And so imagine you're releasing a lot of stem cells, but those stem cells aren't going to be able to do much because the niche, where they're going, all the other signaling parts of the process are sort of not in place. And so that's why, at least intentionally, we wanted to then say, okay, how do we support the whole process? So yeah, so then of course differentiation, and then creating a better inflammatory environment for those cells to become functioning active tissue cells. So all of those things are things that we care about and thought about. And then, like you said, we landed on these 15 different products, and they're all really, really interesting in their own right. And there's some redundancy in what they're doing. And then there's also a lot of, unique effects as well.
So it kind of begs the question, like how would you know that a stem cell product like this is working for you? Are there things that we might see on our aura ring, or does it take several months to notice a difference? Would we
Yeah.
see differences in certain markers in our blood? How can we, we live in a very quantified world now, so people want to know what can I measure, or what can I track to see if this is working? Is it subjective mainly, or are there objective things that we'll see shifting for people?
Yes. So you could certainly look for things that are, everyday clues. Do you recover faster from a workout? Do you have fewer lingering aches and injuries? Does your skin, how do your nails look? How does your skin look? And what you'll immediately notice is that it's in a way disadvantaged by the fact that how closely are we paying attention to all of this stuff? Now, us
Mm,
in the health space pay pretty close attention to this stuff. And yet, there's a saying that I created years ago, the meaningful but invisible. Let's say that you had a 20% improvement in skin laxity over a 6-month period. That's amazing. You would love that, but you would also acclimate
mm,
to that slowly over time. And unless you had objective data, a before and after photo where you could say, look at the difference that I can see, that benefit might be something that you overlook.
mm.
And that is something that is a challenge that we face in health, right? So that's why supplements that cause an immediate boost to performance today, they help you sleep better tonight, they help you think better right now. Those always have an advantage. The nice thing about health span is that people do care about it. I've seen this myself. People get that people age differently and they want to age better. So just the motivation to try to do a better job as a steward of your health, like we talked about in the beginning, um, is a really good idea. But there are, you can look at blood work too. You can look at, immune function, cell count. You could think about if you get sick more regularly or less frequently, excuse me. Um, and yeah, I mean, this all will be a long-term investment to try
Hmm.
to shift the trajectory that we're on. But, these benefits would certainly accumulate slowly over time. You just have to pay attention to them.
Okay. Um, Now, because you're taking the stem cell product for only 4 days out of the month, are there particular times that you should be taking them? Like if you're a female, cycles can come in, the lunar cycle comes into play, right?
Yeah.
Maybe if we have a rest day or several rest days or several active days coming up, like I love maybe you can unpack that, because if you're just taking something every day, it's easy, you take it every day. But if you're only taking it 4 days, um, and I'd also love to know if like fasting impacts the the effectiveness of stem cell production and release, and also if it makes any sense to fast while you're taking uh, these products for 4 days. So yeah, just some questions around when to take it, if it makes a difference at all.
Yeah, those are really good questions, Sachin. And I don't know that we have great information on all of them, but we do have ideas about some of that. So I can talk about that. And so we're trying to model a more natural rhythm of stem cell activity and rest. We talked about that. And, they work in cycles. So we think that periodic stimulation helps to avoid the fatigue that is a part of stem cell exhaustion, right?
Mm,
So we don't want these to be always on.
right.
Now, what do you do around how do you choose when, right? You've got now a month to decide if you're going to be doing this monthly. And what I think is a really interesting protocol is, do you want to be doing intense exercise, or have major stress? So let's say you planned it in a week, but then all of a sudden, you find yourself with work having to stay up super late, or you've been ill. I would push it off, right? Just change your week to be a little bit later because we do know inflammatory markers are problematic. Uh, and so we want to avoid that. Now, do you not want to exercise at all? No, but maybe you don't do your super high intensity exercise in those 4 days, and instead, you go for more, like steady state type of activity, long walks, zone two. That's what I do. Okay. Now, what I think is actually really interesting is to use our other product called Senolytic. And just to give you your audience a very brief introduction to what that is. So, another hallmark of aging is the accumulation of senescent cells. Senescent cells play a role in the body. They're important. They help to prevent cancer, right? They shut when a cell is becoming degrading in its function, then they can go into senescence, and then that will basically prevent them from becoming cancerous. That's like the adaptation
Mm,
of these cells. So that's good. But what they also do is they will then launch all of these inflammatory molecules into their surrounding. And that actually plays a role because it's telling the immune system inflammation is here, send immune molecules, again, following chemical gradients that know where the fire is. And then the immune system helps to clear out that damage. Then stem cells come in and replace those tissues. That's how it should work. But as we get older, we undergo something called immunosenescence, which means our immune system is less good at doing its job. So what do you think happens is you have the creation of more stem cells, but now you're not clearing them. And as a result, it increases inflammation in the body. And what does inflammation do? Inflammation shuts down stem cells.
mm,
So what I think is a really smart protocol, and the one that I do, is our senolytic product. You take 2 days a month, right? And this is mimicking some of the clinical trials that are looking at other compounds. This is from James Kirkland at the Mayo Clinic. Uh, there's work out of the Buck Institute, Judith Campisi, who is somebody that I interviewed. Um, Unfortunately, she is no longer with us, but she was somebody who has done tremendous work helping to understand the process of senescence. She named SASP, which is the senescence associated secretory phenotype. That is all of those inflammatory molecules that the stem cell sends out. Some of the key biochemical players that drive the process. Anyway, she was an invaluable resource. And I really appreciate all the work that she did in bringing senescent cells to, the forefront. And now it's a whole area of research. But anyhow, um, so the goal then is could you clear out some of that inflammation? And after she did her foundational work characterizing senescent cells, then like the next decade in the 2010s, 2020s, we started to see the advent and research of what are called senolytic compounds. And that's James Kirkland and others that then said, okay, can we use a variety of different compounds that actually clear those cells since our immune cell system isn't doing it very well? And the answer is yes. And the research showed lots of very cool stuff. So decreased joint pain, improved gait speed. I know that doesn't sound as sexy, but it means that people are walking more comfortably when they get older. And there's a lot of, there are public companies now that are looking at different strategies to create drugs that would address senescent cells. Our product has 9 different compounds that are targeting different pathways that will cause a cell that is, they're often called zombie cells because they're like partially dead. Like they're still
right.
using resources. They're not totally dead. And so by blocking several kinase pathways and generating more oxidative stress in those tissues, you actually can cause them to go into autophagy, which is cell death. And at that point, for the next day or two, we're not exactly sure of the kinetics of the inflammatory profile post-senolytic, but we see that typically at least 7 days later, that inflammatory markers systemically are lower than they were. So what I do is I do 2 days once a month of our product Senolytic, And then I wait a couple of days and then I do stem cell. So, right? So you're removing some of the inflammation and then you're driving renewal. And that you can see right there that there is no one product that is going to address all of aging. And that doing this, not only, attacking the right targets, but doing it in the right cadence, in the right order, makes a lot of sense. What about fasting, you asked? Can that help too? Yeah, possibly, right? Because we know that simply eating is going to drive a lot of oxidative stress. Oxidative stress and inflammation are related. You do see lower amounts of inflammatory markers during fasting, like nuclear factor kappa beta, which is a master regulator of inflammation. So you make more ketones; they're less inflammatory as well. All of that can also support a better environment for stem cells. But I wouldn't worry about, do you have to fast in that period? No. And in fact, I'm not familiar with research that shows that it's better to do that. But if you are somebody who fasts and want to do it once a month, that 4 day period might not be a bad time to try.
Okay. I love it. So
Cool.
almost like a week of so 2 days of the senolytic, wait two
Mhm.
days, and
Yeah.
then 4 days of the stem cells. So we're looking at about, 7, 8 day window where
Yeah.
we can get rid of our zombie cells, right? Get rid of the stuff that isn't serving us anymore, thank it, bless it for what it's done for us, and then send out to reduce some of that inflammation, right? And give our bodies a couple of days to clear all that out, and then bring in the bad boys, right? Bring in the stem cells to heal and repair and help us regenerate. And it sounds like what you're saying is that it would be uh, highly beneficial for us to perhaps take it easy, not do our crazy workout that week, maybe go for a walk, zone two type of activities, maybe spend more time in nature. It's always good to give our bodies a bit of a break too,
Yeah.
um, and then we can get right back to it. So that makes a lot of sense, and I love that uh, Qualia's products, at least these two, are formulated in such a way that it's not this huge pill burden, right? There's sometimes when you take a ton of supplements or start adding supplements to your ongoing protocol, A, the costs start adding up, and then B,
Yeah.
the pill burden starts adding up, and then there's just more to forget, and it's hard to be consistent if that's the case. So I love the convenience of this, and they're packaged conveniently in blister packs as well, which makes it easy to take and remember
Yeah.
and travel with too.
Thank you for bringing that practical aspect into the conversation because you could have the best science in the world. And what that typically means is you've had decades to ask all of the subsequent questions that you would want. That's what the science is a very slow process and it can be frustrating because it's slow. But let's say you have crystal clear data on something, and yet if it's impractical to employ, it's hard to do, all the science in the world is not going to benefit you if you can't put it into practice. So I think a huge advantage of these two products for us is that you take them once a month, one over 2 days, one over 4 days. And if it's on subscription, you just get them in the mail and then you take them when the time is right. And what I would encourage everybody to do is to make a recurring calendar event for both. So that would mean that I do my Senolytics over a weekend. So it's the first weekend of every month. I have my shipment arrive ahead of time. So it comes a couple of days before, and then it's in the calendar. And yeah, it's a blister pack. So you take one half of the blister pack one day, one half the next. And by the way, you either feel nothing or you feel good. Like that's my experience at least. So I tend to feel more cognitively sharp on days that I do take it. So it's not as though in this case there's a consequence of like, oh, it's grueling and I have to
Mm-hmm.
do this thing that is good for me, but I hate it. If anything, I feel pretty good on that day. Now, we did write an article for the company that I was at previously, Human OS, which is I founded looking at the high intensity interval training on senolytics, or on senescence, excuse me. And it too can act like a senolytic. It can also break down senescent cells. And the way that it does that is when you work out really hard, that drives a little bit of DNA damage, which sounds bad, but then that brings in your immune system, and then that helps to clear up those broken down cells. So what I do is on those 2 days, I'll do like a 20 to 30 minute hit class of some sort, whether it's cycling or, like a boot camp style. And then in that following week, I have again, zone 2, walking, hill climbing, just stuff that's getting blood flow through my body. And I keep it a little less intense. But put both of those in your calendar. So the senolytic on what I do for Saturday and Sunday, and then 2-day rest. And then I do Tuesday to Saturday, or I do Wednesday to Saturday, excuse me. And that's just a recurring event in my calendar. It makes it really, really easy. And it's, I think, a really cool way to be at the forefront of this awesome health span extending science.
Yeah, I love that. And we'll have a special coupon code that people can use to get an additional 15% off. So you can subscribe and save, use the coupon code, have this shipped to your door every month, month in, month out, and reap the benefits. And what I can tell you is that this is a drop in the bucket compared to what it costs to have stem cells injected into you.
Yeah.
So it would take you years, maybe even over a decade, to match that cost. So very affordable, very accessible, and I'm grateful that this is available to us now, in such a convenient and accessible and an affordable way.
Yeah, me too. In fact, another thought that I have had uh, with focusing in on this area is that if you are getting medical stem cells done, this would be a great time to take this product, right? Because what are you doing with stem cells? Well, there's lots of different ways, but the most common ones is you take them out of the body, you concentrate them, you put them back into a site of injury. And that in doing so, you are affecting the inflammatory state, and you're also offering cells that can be differentiated into healthy new tissue. Great. Well, you would still want all of the beneficial factors that our botanicals will promote. So if you're investing $4,000 or $5,000, which is, common, and it can get much more expensive than that. But if you're investing that amount to, have some stem cells injected into, a sore Achilles or something, then I would definitely be investing in this product to take it around the same time that the stem cells were going into my body. Like, let's say I was getting a stem cell procedure on that day, then I would take stem cell from Qualia Life to support the healthiest process along the way. I would do the senolytics ahead of time, and then I would have the procedure, and then I would do our product starting the day that I'm getting the procedure. So probably the morning of, and then the additional 4 days or 3 days.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Good advice. Are there any, just in case somebody's wondering, are there any contraindications if somebody's on any medications or has, any active disease or disorder that they're working through?
It sounds like platitudes to say, talk to your doctor. You have to talk to your doctor. You might get a disappointing response, but the reason why is because different drugs are affecting, cytochrome P450 enzymes in your liver. There's all sorts of pharmacological interactions. And once you're on some medications, you need to know how something else that you might be taking could cause either the drug that you're taking on a daily basis to not get metabolized. So it's like you've taken 5 times the dose, or it's going to cause rapid metabolism. So it feels like you're not even taking the medication on that day. And that's why if you're going to be committing, let's think about this from like pan out and look in. Let's say you're on a medication and you want to start this. Go talk to your doctor and say, all right, this is the med that I'm on. This is what I'd like to do. Do you have any reasons why this would be contraindicated? And then hear what they have to say. Involve them in your health journey. And so they know what you're doing, and then they can offer some of, their take on whether or not it's something that is going to be risky, or, I mean, they might not know, but that's why I wanted to spend a little more time encouraging people to, I think, do the right thing. I think oftentimes it can just sound like, a disclaimer. Like, make sure that ask for medical advice before you do anything. I think let's turn that upside down. Let's actually think of you if you are really instrumental in your own health journey, which we talked about at the very beginning of the show. Your doctor is a part of your health team. Involve them, right? Seek their guidance, get their wisdom, get their take. And that I wish we had, a relationship with our medical team that was not so haphazard, where well, I haven't seen my doctor in years. And so that's what I would recommend. And because, right, there's all sorts of issues that a person could face, and they're going to know the specifics of that to see if there's anything that might be contraindicated.
Awesome. This has been very enlightening. I know I've asked you a ton of questions and you've graciously responded to each one. Is there something that I haven't asked you that you wish I would have or should have asked?
We talked about this a little bit. No, that was great. So I'll just sort of freeform here, but I would keep in mind that we won't affect aging through just one pathway. The way that I view it is that there are a lot of different opportunities for us to try to intervene in a way that changes our relationship with time and uh and how time will can cause, a degradation of certain types of functions. Lifestyle can sound like platitudes, just like it sounds like go to your doctor. Lifestyle is enormously powerful. I mean, what interests me most, honestly, is how really cool innovations layer on top of really good lifestyle techniques. Diet, sleep, circadian rhythm and alignment, all forms of movement, higher intensity, lower intensity, and then even things that are not, they're a little more sophisticated. Light. I gave a TED talk on light years ago. I'm fascinated by that subject. That can
Mm,
have an impact on stem cells. Hyperbaric oxygen, which is more in the medical realm, but that's now making its way into the wellness industry. And so, yeah, and it can feel overwhelming. There's so much to do. I can't do all of it. And then that can take the wind out of your sails to do any of it. You're like, I just can't keep up. Like, look at Brian
mm,
Johnson. Brian Johnson is a person who is in the health and wellness space, who's very wealthy. He sold a business for like nearly $1 billion, and he's got all this money, and he's got a really intense interest in health span and health. And every day, his life is filled with measurement, everything is prescribed and down to the T. And when I look at him, I say, good for him. He's super interested in this. It's his hobby, but you don't have to be like him. In fact, few people can or should. And just because of that doesn't mean he shouldn't do what he wants to do. Because I think that people could call it orthorexia or the unhealthy obsession with being healthy. And that might be true with him. I don't know. I've never met him. But it also could just be, again, his hobby, something that he's passionate about. He wakes up every day and he wants to do it. He's got all the time in the world. So you have to ultimately decide what's right for you. And I think that with health, it's about calibrating the whole world of possibilities to fit into your life in a way that feels good, that you feel good about the steps that you're taking in the moment. And that can change over the year. You might have more or less time, you might have more or less resources. So it's almost a daily exercise to figure what do I need today? What can I fit into my day? And how do I, make sure that I'm doing what I can to, you know, attend to my health and feel good about it. So that's maybe parting words, if you will, like find a method, an approach that feels good to you, and you can always upgrade it, modify it in time. But just because you're not doing everything doesn't mean that what you're doing isn't valuable.
right.
And hopefully some of this information will, be things that you decide to pick up on and try and that benefit you in your life.
Amazing. Dan, this has been super enlightening. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for the work that you do to make our lives better, not only as clinicians, but for our clients that we want to help and support. Thank you for the innovation that comes out of Qualia. The supplements are fantastic, very convenient, and I love all the research that goes into them. You don't just slap together products, you research them and then put them out there in the world. And I appreciate that as a practitioner, knowing that we can make a recommendation to our clients that's going to be uh, coming from high integrity in terms of research, and also knowing that you're providing tremendous value that's accessible to people, not only from a pill burden standpoint, but also from an investment standpoint. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Sachin. We always consider the pill burden idea of it's a part of every conversation. And there are times where you could make a product that's 20 pills, but we don't because few people could really do it. And so we're always considering the entire picture for folks, and we do care about that. And it's why I joined the company because I really admire. They just won the National Business Journal Science and Innovation Award for um, doing research on all of the products that they bring to the market. Not everybody does
Mm,
that. And
yeah.
so, we really care about doing it right. And that's a core part of the fabric of the entire company. And that was a real powerful draw for me.
I'm curious, is there anything in the hopper right now that excites you that's coming up?
Yeah, I mean the product team is always working on new ideas. And we're thinking about ways that we would categorize. So I mentioned it a little bit earlier, like health performance agents. So those are things that are helping you do something today, right now. Like you want to think well today, take Qualia Mind. It's going to help you perform at the thinking tasks that you have, in front of you. You want to sleep well tonight, Qualia Night is going to support those processes. Are all more immediate feedback, supporting the performance, health related performance of something that you care about. And then we have these health span uh, products that are like they're looking into like the cutting edge science around what is driving aging, at least like that proximal level, and can we intervene in a way that is going to change your trajectory? And then even products that are health supportive. So things like our magnesium product, which we recently launched, which I think is a really innovative approach on how to take magnesium. As you know, I'm sure there's so many different forms of magnesium out there, and different ones are doing different things. And we have a population where 50% of people in the United States aren't meeting the recommended daily intake for that. And so,
Mm,
like, they're all good. They're all really, really interesting. But we are working on ways to capitalize on opportunities. What I mean, capitalize is like, okay, people are not doing, they're not taking advantage of this idea, and we want to help make that easy. Like we're going to take all sorts of science, we're going to put it into an easy format for people to benefit from. And we hope that products like ours serve as catalysts for other uh, behaviors that are also healthy. Like people can say, oh, supplements are a crutch. Well, they can also be a catalyst. Like you're more likely to have convergent behaviors, right? You're doing other things that converge on, taking healthy steps already. All right, I've
mm.
invested in this. I'm taking it every day. Well, I'm going to go to bed on time, and I'm going to go for a walk, and I'm going to stand more, right? All the little things and it can build on itself in a really positive way. So yeah, so there's other cool products that are coming down the pipeline. Nothing that we can speak of yet, but that's generally how we're viewing finding opportunities to help.
Love it.
Cool.
Thank you again, Dan. Appreciate you. And I'm looking forward to the day we meet in person. So hopefully that happens here really soon.
I can't wait, Sachin. It's a really delightful discussion, and I want to thank you for the great work that you're doing, helping people too. We need people like you out there, and you're a really excellent host. So thanks for having me on your show.
Thank you. I appreciate you. Have a great day.
You too.